name's Simon Fairfax and welcome to my new YouTube channel. I am going to be talking about various things over the next few weeks, my books, my series, what inspired me to write, and what keeps my continued interest in a subject which I feel passionate about. I write in 4 series: financial thrillers set in the 80s and 90s. I write medieval historical fiction set in the early 15th century. Italian Renaissance fiction just at the turn of the 15th century, and rather oddly, traditional westerns set just after the American Civil War in the late 1860s. However, tonight I'm going to talk about my medieval series, and it's going to be the start of a series of talks I'm going to give about it for my YouTube channel. So, what do I write and why do I write it? I get asked this a lot. I give a lot of talks to people with lots of groups. They come round. The first question I'm always asked is, why do you write about this, or why do you write about that, and what inspired you to write about this? Now, the medieval series was inspired by a number of things. When we were at school, at primary school, in those days, they used to teach us about medieval history. I still have a textbook or exercise book where I've drawn the picture of the Battle of Agincourt was taught to me by the school teacher. I looked back at this and my mother found it a few years ago and I laughed at it. But the inspiration was there. That and Ladybird books. I still have my Henry V Ladybird book, which I bought, was given to me all those years ago. And I read it avidly, probably hundreds of times. And this inspired me, this figure of Henry V going along and fighting against overwhelming odds at the Battle of Agincourt. So when I decided to write, after writing the financial thrillers, I wanted to do medieval. Why? Because the period fascinates me. I love the whole ethos of it, the chivalry, the period of time when Henry V was striving, and the fight against the French in the 100 Years' War. And also, when I was growing up, I loved traditional films like The Black Shield of Falworth. Despite Tony Curtis's appalling Bronx accent, it was actually quite faithfully accurate. The armour, the way they fought, the way they trained, all these things inspired a 9-10-year-old boy to think later on, I'd love to write about this. That and Robert Taylor's version of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. These were brilliant films that were so influential upon what I was going to do later. So with this in mind, writers set out to write what they want to read. And there are so many writers out there, if you ask them and say why, they say, well, because I want to read this and it wasn't quite what I wanted, or quite what I wanted to do, or it wasn't quite set out how I wanted it to be. And we all write to entertain, and half the time I suspect we write to entertain ourselves because we love what we write and we want other people to enjoy it too. So for me, when I looked at leading up to the Battle of Agincourt, there are very, very few fictional accounts that fill the gap, not only for the battle, but leading up to the battle. I can't think of a single series that leads directly up to the battle. Yeah, there are certain aspects that lead up through Crécy and Poitiers and leading up with gaps. But for me, I wanted to write a consequential account on a year by year with my heroes inserted into the factual events leading up from a certain year. So I started to look into research. Now for me, I don't normally read fictional accounts, or didn't prior to this, a non-fiction account, sorry. And now I started to look hard and I found this brilliant book by Chris Given Wilson called Henry IV. Now it won awards and it is absolutely fabulous, it's huge. That allied to my A-level English, where we studied King Henry IV Part 2, so I had a good idea of what was going on. These two events caused me to start writing, so the more I dipped in to Chris Given Wilson's brilliant book, the more I started to think about my books on a year-by-year basis. So everything was strictly in a chronological year-by-year account. So it was a calendar year, what the events of that particular year. And I had to start somewhere. Now, part of me wanted to start in 1403. But what I found was the events leading from 1403 to when I started in 1410 was such a big gap that I couldn't do it. Yet I still held at the back of my mind, and more about this later. So I started in 1410, and the more I delved into 1410, because the wonderful thing about Chris Given Wilson's book which is rare for a non-fiction writer. It is all chronological. So many of the writers say, oh, I'll take this bit, and then they jump to that bit, and you lose it, whereas he writes all the way through. This happened in March, this happened in April. Fabulous for a person who's researching. Absolutely brilliant. So I like 1410. There were a lot of things going on, and not only that, and this features a lot in my work, there were gaps. Why did the fire start in St Omer? Who started it? It had massive effects. And why were they building a siege engine in the middle of St Omer Cathedral 30 miles from Calais? How were they going to get it there in secret? These and other questions. And then you wonder about Owen ap Glendower's final battle. Why did they turn around and get found out? Who betrayed them? Nobody knows. You speak to the Glendower Society, they don't know. These wonderful little snippets come in. And also, where did the battle take place? Oh, well, it was somewhere on the borders. That leaves a lot of space. So all these gaps are fabulous because you can insert them in with your heroes as to how, what, why, where. So this is the starting point. So I chose 1410. Now, as to my heroes, well, the more research I found, I wanted three disparate people, not the classic archer. So many stories feature the archer and Agincourt. I wanted three disparate characters, a bit like the Three Musketeers, where they're all completely different types of people that can bring a different dimension to my stories. Now, I found that the Cornish wrestlers, and Cornish wrestling was a big thing in that time, by the way, the Cornish wrestlers actually fought at Agincourt. They took a banner, which is still there on their site, to the battle, fighting probably as archers. A lot of them did because they were so massively strong and they could draw a longbow, or warbow as it was called then. And so I thought, right, one's got to be a Cornish wrestler. The other one, because I lived in Italy and I knew a bit about it, I wanted to be an Italian assassin to give a dark side. And then I wanted the traditional English knight, not an archer. And the more I delved, the more it was perfect, because everyone imagines knights to be quite old when they're knighted. So many were knighted in 16, 17 years old. Now, few people will criticise me for this, but it's actually true. So I wanted my hero to be one of my three heroes, the leading player of the story, Sir James de Grisbert, or James de Grisbert as he was then, to become knighted in his late teens. Now, the other thing is that I found that a lot of the nascent class, the aspirational people, the newbies, the loads of money but no class, wanted to become knights. They were the aspirant class of their day. And so being a merchant, a lot of the merchants pushed their sons into the knighthood. This was fabulous. For me, it was a gift, because I then had three completely disparate characters that I could draw together, each with their own skills, that I could implant into my books. And this is the start of my journey, given all the background. And this is where we start from to get everything going, to bring the stories together. It's character driven, but it's also event driven, because everything is contained within one single year, starting roughly in January and finishing in December. And you would be amazed at what happened in one of those years. You think politics is complicated now? You wait till we go back in time and explore everything that was happening at that time. So join me in the future and we'll explore each one in detail.